The Jews are the indigenous people of the land of Israel. Jews have been living consistently in the land of Israel for more than 3,000 years. The history of the land of Israel is stretching for more than 3,000 years. In the beginning, the Israelites got out of slavery from Egypt, led by their leader Moses, and they were brought to the land of Israel, where they settled and wrestled against the Canaanians until the 11th century BC, where they established their kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. And among them famous kings like King David and King Solomon. But after King Solomon, the kingdom was spread to two: Israel in the north and Judea in the south. Eventually, after a few hundred years, the kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. And after a few hundred years after that, the kingdom of Judea was conquered by the Babylonian Empire. That happened in the year 586 BC. And that also resulted in the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem and with the exile of many of the Jews to Babylonia. However, 70 years after that, under the Persian Empire, the Jews were allowed to return to Judea to rebuild Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And they did so in the year 520 BC. And they continue with that over the Persian period, and then afterwards during the Hellenistic Greek Macedonian period from the year 330 BC until the Hellenists oppressed them to such a level that they had to revolt in the famous Hashmonaic revolt, the Maccabee revolt, which we celebrate in Hanukkah every year. And they re-established their independence to the second Jewish kingdom, also called the Hashmonai kingdom, or just Judea. And they ruled the land and they ruled Jerusalem for a few more hundred years until they had to deal with the Roman Empire that started as an ally but eventually turned to be a ruling empire that made Judea into a vassal state. And when the Jews revolted in the year 66, the Roman conquered the land completely. They destroyed the second temple and they exiled hundreds of thousands of Jews all around the empire and to Europe and North Africa, for example. But even after that, Jews continued to live in the land of Israel and the surrounding areas. Instead of the temple, they were ruled by the Sanhedrin, which was a court that ruled the Jews. And even though the Jews revolted again in the second Jewish revolt in the year 132 until the year 135, that ended up in a disaster, which more Jews were exiled and more Jewish towns were destroyed. However, Jews continued to live in the land, and the Sanhedrin continued to rule the Jews until the year 427, when Christian authority disbanded and outlawed the Sanhedrin ruling. But over the years, even before that, they managed to write the Mishnah and start to compile the Talmud. So even after that, when the Sanhedrin was outlawed by just the position of the head of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi, was outlawed, the Sanhedrin itself was continued by the yeshiva in the city of Tiberias, on the sea of the Galilee. And in 520, 100 years after that, the Mar Zutra family, Bar Zutra, came from Babylonia. He himself is from the head of the Babylon exile, meaning the head of the Babylonian diaspora. which means that he's a descendant of King David, and he went to the land of Israel, and he became the head of the Sanhedrin, and his dynasty continued until the 9th century, already during the Arab period. In the beginning of the 7th century, the Jews revolted again for the last time against the Romans in the year 614 to the year 620. They managed to liberate the city, Jerusalem, and also rule of most of the land for 3 to 4 years, until they had to deal with the Christians, and they could not do it, and they lost the war. And after that, in the year 634, the Arabs invaded the land, and the land of Israel and Syria and Egypt became a part of the Arab Islamic Caliphate. The Arab period lasted from 634 to the year 1099. And over that time, first of all, the Jews were allowed to return to live in Jerusalem, something that the Romans didn't allow them to do for hundreds of years. Also, Tiberias became a very big city of learning. They compiled the Hebrew Bible over there in writing again. And also, they invented the vowel system, the Nikud, for the Hebrew language. And also, they wrote a lot of poems and parables in Tiberias. But not just in Tiberias, all over the Galilee. And also, they built a new city next to Jerusalem called Ramla, with a very big Jewish community. Also in Jaffa and Akkar and Haifa and Caesarea. But because the Arabs had so many wars between one another, and the Jewish community in the land of Israel in the Arab period was eventually uprooted and was disturbed, and had to move from one place to another to find shelter and safety, because there were so many wars between this fraction of the Arabs, this fraction of the Muslims, and the Turks, and then the Persians, and also there were Sudanese and other black Muslims fighting against each other. For example, in the 10th century, the Fatimid, which were from North Africa, and they were Shia, they conquered the land. And at the beginning, they were very favorable of the Jews, and they appointed a Jew to rule the land, and his name was Paltiel. During his time, the Jews had enjoyed a good life in the land of Israel. But in the beginning of the 11th century, what happened is that the Caliphate, the Fatimid Caliphate, became extreme against non-Muslims, against Jews, and against Christians, and they tried to force Islam on them, and that caused a lot of destructions. And eventually also the Bedouin tribe in the land also revolted against the Fatimid, and that caused a lot of wars that caused a lot of damage and death and destruction to the Jewish communities in the land of Israel, because they were fighting, and also they were killing the Jews whenever they had the opportunity. So when you get to the end of the 11th century, just before the Crusaders invading the land, the Jewish communities in the land of Israel are already in a very disrupted situation, and most of them are in the shore area, like Haifa and Akko and Jaffa and Gaza. And so when the Crusaders invade the land in the year 1099, they massacre most of the Jews in the land, like in Akko, in Haifa, and also in all over the area, in Yavne and Ono, and also in Jerusalem. And the Crusaders also killed a lot of Muslims. They kept on fighting against the Fatimid and against the Seljuks. But you also have, in the Crusade period, you start to see a wave of Jews coming from the diaspora, from Spain, from North Africa, from France and Italy, and they are coming to the land of Israel. We have, for example, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, that come to the land of Israel in the year 1140, for example. He's the famous rabbi that says in his poem, my heart is in the east, but I'm in the west. He's one of the person that inspired Zionism. We also have the Rambam, Rabbi Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, a very famous rabbi. He came to the land of Israel in about 1165, and he traveled in the land. He also came to the Temple Mount, he came to Hebron, and then he moved to Egypt. And his descendant became the rulers of the Jewish communities in Egypt, and by that they became the leaders of the Jewish community in Israel as well, until the 15th century. Yes. We also have, in the same period of time,